Moving on to item 9, an initiated item. I'm not going to read through this whole report. I want to highlight a couple things in it, and we can talk more about it. I firmly believe we have a responsibility to regularly review processes set forth in the municipal code and to see where there are opportunities to cut red tape, improve efficiencies, and reduce unnecessary costs and time associated with the development process, particularly for individual property owners trying to build a single home, complete an addition, remodel a detached accessory structure, or build an unlighted recreation court. The MDRA process results in additional costs to the applicant, requires additional staff time, and provides little, if any, new information and causes substantial delays in permit approval and construction. It's also fairly unique to Poway. My proposal is fairly straightforward. We direct staff to bring forward proposed changes to the Poway Municipal Code to eliminate the MDRA process for residential projects, including the construction of a single home, additions, remodels, detached accessory structures, and unlighted recreational courts. For projects eligible to skip the MDRA process, if we move in that direction, applicants would still be required to submit all of the technical documents and plans required by the MDRA process. However, instead of doing that prior to application for a building permit, they would submit them at the time of building permit application. I would also suggest that if we move in this direction, we schedule a one-year look back following implementation to assess its impact on streamlining the development process. So that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. We do have one speaker on this, Eric Weller.
Evening again, and I do have that item. So for the Poway Voices is a nonpartisan civic group promoting openness, transparency, and civic engagement in Poway government, primarily focused on development topics. Is what it is. We are on social media. We are in multiple areas, but that's what we are, and it's 6+. So that's the group. That's the meaning. That's what we're after, because we love this place, Poway, that we're in here with you. So for this item, I always focus on things when I see red tape, cutting red tape. And I'm sure that's something that can be political, right, of people's stance politically, I guess. But a lot of that red tape or those processes are there to help protect neighbors and the area, whether it's wildlife, which I see that one was excluded, which is great, or your neighbor. So I know many of us like to be good neighbors for each other, but not everybody is, and not everybody is in all these neighborhoods. So courtesy notices are provided to neighbors 10 days prior to approval was one of the items that's in the MDRA process. So it sounds like that is being requested to be struck. I know that I would love to be notified if my neighbors are putting something in, but honestly, I talk to my neighbors, so they're going to tell me when they're doing improvements, especially if they're major improvements. But if they're minor improvements, I mean, we're talking with each other. But again, not all neighbors are the same. It would be great to have a process in place, and I shouldn't even say it would be great to, because there already is a process in place to notify those neighbors of these minor developments at their neighbors' homes. So I would be open. I would like to see maybe some more refinement, or this item just struck down. And that's my stance. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Let me go into a little more detail too. Cutting to the chase, our MDRA process is, in my view, the ultimate poster child for government red tape. Each parcel in Poway has zoning restrictions, design standards, building regulations, and municipal code requirements that must be adhered to. Doing away with the MDRA process will not relax any of those standards or requirements. But what it will do is end an unnecessarily cumbersome and time-consuming process, not only for the applicants, but for staff. How time-consuming? It's interesting. Our housing element claims that the MDRA process should take 4 to 6 weeks. That's far from reality. Currently, it's not unusual for an MDRA to take more than a year, only to be followed by substantially similar building permit process after MDRA approval. As for the neighbors' interests, they are protected by a myriad of development requirements I mentioned: design standards, zoning, building regulations, municipal code. Unless an applicant wants a variance or some other exception to existing development standards, they ought to be able to improve their private property. Having said that, given the concerns expressed by Eric and another email we got, I would suggest that as we move forward, hopefully to eliminate the MDRA process, we can add a requirement that at a minimum, signage be posted at the site at the time that the building permit is submitted. Maybe it can be a more elaborate public notification process. In either case, that way neighbors would know what's planned and how they can get more information from the building department. And I'm open to other ideas for public notice, but it's time for the MDRA process itself as a whole to go. It's bloated, it's unwieldy, and it's red tape at its worst. If somebody wants to invest in Poway and improve their property, let's not put up bureaucratic barricades. Let's get the hell out of the way. It'll be good for the city, and it's the right thing to do. So I welcome comments, questions. Bob can certainly answer questions about the process, but I would appreciate your support on this. Who wants to dive in? Caitlin, go for it.
Thank you. One of the first things that I heard from residents when I joined the city council was Poway is really hard to work with. It's really hard to get things done. I was trying to put a pool in. I was trying to remodel my bathroom. I was trying to redo my kitchen. I was trying to put turf in my backyard. So many things, and it always came down to the process is just so onerous. It's lengthy. It's expensive. MDRA is not free, correct? There are fees associated with that in addition to building permit fees and all the other fees that are required. So the timeline and the fees for what I have a really hard time seeing what it's adding to the process. I understand the interest in transparency, and I think that's kind of what you were asking for, Eric. I think it's a little dramatic to say you need to protect the neighbors. I don't know what your neighbor's new kitchen is doing to you, but I understand the curiosity of there's construction trucks or there's something going on. So I don't see a huge issue with some kind of public information available, but I just think that it's a very probably outdated process, honestly, and is not doing the best for residents, which I think is what we're always trying to do. And so I would absolutely support this. I welcome suggestions for the best way to publicly notice these things. But I think that there's a lot of good to be done by eliminating this layer of bureaucracy.
Thanks, Caitlin. Anita?
Yeah, I think kind of at the heart of what we're hearing in the feedback on this and actually other housing-related projects is a lack of local control and transparency. And I think people feel they have nothing left. And, you know, this is just one more thing that's, I think people are feeling like it's taken out of their hands. And to Eric's point, I think many of us have enjoyed living in a neighborhood where we know our neighbors. We have block parties. We have a text thread, so we communicate with each other. But, you know, things are coming down from Sacramento. We've got, you know, we're welcoming new neighbors into Poway, and they don't know how Poway, you know, is, and they're learning, and maybe they haven't met their neighbors, or maybe they don't want to meet their neighbors, and maybe they don't want to tell their neighbors what they're doing. And I feel like the MDRA, the public notice part of the process, is a way to help foster that transparency and communication that we want, you know, that we're used to. That's kind of the Poway of doing things. And I think it's the baby that shouldn't be thrown out with the bathwater on this. And I appreciate hearing from both of you that, having some sort of public notice process, I think is going to be important. I think let's not get rid of that, and let's keep the Poway in this process.
Thanks, Anita. Peter?
Some interest in this. I've actually got a couple emails from this, once from the Poway Voices group and another from John DeSantis. The Poway Voices group opposed this change, but I think, Eric, you spoke to that. At the GVCA, they had some concerns about reducing the public notification and dialogue, and some issues about potentially the ADU permitting process and a few other things. Actually, I have a real quick question. For ADUs, do those go through the MDRA process? Okay. All right. So, okay. That's good to know. So I guess that even if this was kept, it would not be there. So there's still a lot that I'd like to know about how the MDRA process works. The proposal that I see before me actually is really great because it's about getting information, to come back before the city council to address or reduce the scope of these, scope of the MDRAs. So I think that's actually pretty innocuous, to be honest, because the decision for this would be coming somewhat later after we get a lot more details. I think this was born, the whole purpose of this was born out of the desire to periodically re-examine the necessity of certain regulations, which I think is actually something I fully support. And I also agree that the building process in California is enormously layered and it's complex, and it grows that way with every passing session of the legislature. And I see some of this in the areas outside of housing in some of the external subcommittees that I sit on. You just get these packets full of assembly bills and Senate bills that are being passed, and you sometimes wonder why. What are people thinking? And can people just mind their own business? But that's not what the state does. And I think if there are some sections of the Poway Municipal Code that are overly burdensome, particularly compared with the benefit, then they should be excised. And that's actually sort of where a lot of my questions come in. I've heard numbers come in all over the place as to, how long it takes to get an MDRA. I heard like 30 days, 60 days, a year. And I've seen a comment that said, there's not much of a burden to property owners or homeowners. And I do disagree with that, because if you've got a plan that's basically, it's well put together, you've got a competent person doing your building and they're following the rules, then you're sitting there 30, 60 days, 90 days, whatever the number is, with paying interest on a, building loan, and that's not like insignificant to do. And also you don't have your project or improvement. And I think everyone here has had people come to them. I have, basically saying it took me forever to build my house, or I've got a guy to think of right now is it took me like all these times going back to staff and trying to get this to actually work. I'm actually right now, yesterday I was talking to the city manager about another one of my constituents and having some issues with building inspectors. So that's, something that happens all the time, and I'd like to make that a little bit easier for folks. So I am interested, though, in not losing the notification process. But at the same time, I don't want to replace the MDRA with an MDRA by another name. But I'm hoping we can keep that in to some extent. And I'd like to get the staff to let me know if that's possible when they come back, provided we vote on this, when they come back for a proposal to remove or narrow the scope of the MDRAs. And two other things I'd like to know is I would like to get an idea as to about how long MDRAs actually take on average to go from I started with an MDRA application to I am now starting the building permit application. I honestly suspect that's going to be pretty variable, but it would be helpful for me to make a decision when the time comes. And on the flip side of that, there's the public's interest in this process. And I don't know how much the public actually uses the process that currently exists. So I'd like for staff to actually let me know that, on average, how many comments are we actually getting on MDRAs? And are these substantive comments? Are these comments like, you can't build what you have on your private property, even though it follows the rules. That's not a legitimate comment. But, you know, a comment like, hey, I want you to turn things around a little bit, and maybe that's a reasonable comment, like, you know, face a little bit of a different direction. And it's an option for the homeowner to do whatever they want with their private property. So a couple of those things would be, I think, helpful to me when the time comes. But you know, I'm more than happy to concur, I guess, with the proposal.
Thanks, Peter. Brian?
I think it's a great idea. To echo what Galen said, you know, it's the number one complaint I get is that Poway can take a while to get this stuff moving. And I think it was notable what you said at the beginning, Mayor, that, you know, this isn't removing rules or requirements or anything. It's just changing or streamlining the process. So I think it makes sense, and I support it.
So I sense we have consensus. We don't have to take a formal vote on this. Staff, I think what you heard is that we want to see a new plan for removing the MDRA process, but preserving a comment process, whether that be, I'd like to see a couple options for preserving public notice, maybe ranging from a sign at the site to perhaps looking at preserving the current public notice mechanism. And also, Peter wants to know some timeline. Maybe, Bob, you might be able to answer that for us right now. What's a typical timeline? I've heard, as I said in the housing element, it says 4 to 6 weeks, but what I've heard is often closer to a year or more. And I realize some of that is on the applicant. I'm not saying this is on staff, but give us a rough idea.
So staff will review the MDRA in 4 to 6 weeks. How good of an application we get is going to determine how long the process takes and how quickly an applicant can respond to comments. Again, our goal is 4 to 6, 30 days is really our goal, but sometimes
And that's to do the initial
for us
review.
to do the review. We give, if there's any comments on the project, we give those back, and then it's up to the applicant how quickly they can get the plans back to us to review again, and we will again review them, and usually it's less than 30 days the second time. But so a lot of times it's on the applicant as to how long it's going to take, but we usually turn our review around in 30 days. So it's hard to say, but I will say the average does usually take more like 4 months to get through the process, because people, when we give them the comments back, they have to get their architect to address them or their engineer, depending on what the issue is.
How often have you seen people get it right the first time?
I have not.
Okay.
I've seen it in two tries, but not the first time.
Just checking. Okay, thank you. So I think staff probably has a clear sense of what we'd like to see come back and come back soon. Appreciate, Eric, your comments and GVCA's comments. And we did have an email in the record from Councilmember John Mullen. So thank you for your support of that item, and look forward to discussing it again very soon. Moving on, council committee reports and announcements. Brian.